Hello, friend. Welcome to Speech Goods, a podcast where we showcase awesome SLPs doing awesome traditional and non-traditional SLP things. Myself and the guests on the show are here to talk about the goods, the bads, and the untangible parts of ourselves and our SLP careers, and how, despite everyday life, have just done the dang thing, loving what we do. I'm your host, Danni. A few years ago, I went from burnt out, dissatisfied with my SLP job to dusting off my big girl pants and sprinkling some determination in my 20-cent coffee and starting my own debt-free private practice. Now, I love my working career and wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It was the support and wisdom from others around me that helped me refine my why. In this show, I hope that you're going to find support and wisdom of your own. Hello, friend, and welcome to this episode of the Speech Goods podcast. I am so excited to have you here today, and I'm so excited to introduce myself. Yeah, did I get you on that one? Did I trick you? No? A little bit? Maybe? Anyways, I digress. Today, you are going to get just little old me talking about one of the most interesting topics in the finance world. I find that some people can get very sometimes even emotional about this topic, which I find very interesting. And there's differing opinions about this particular topic. And I'm just here I want to give some insight and some information, especially because my husband and I have a little bit of a unique history with this topic. And I guess I should go ahead and just spit out what I'm going to talk about. Should I do that? Probably. So I'm actually going to be talking to you today about credit cards. Credit cards. Oh, some people, they have made some people cry. They have given some people free airplane tickets. You know, what's the deal with these, right? And I think it's really important that we have these discussions about credit cards because it's very easy for them to be misused. But at the same time, they also, when used appropriately and correctly, they can have a lot of rewards and a lot of benefits. And I think that really goes back to understanding not just the product, but also understanding yourself. So today, I'm going to share with you 4 truths about credit cards that I have learned. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background on myself, because I told you earlier that I have a little bit of a unique history with credit cards. So when I started on my debt-free journey, I was very much a Dave Ramsey girl. I still love Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey. I'm a speech therapist who can't talk. Go figures. Anyways, Dave Ramsey played a big part in my debt-free journey. I paid off $52,000 in 25 months. The first half of it, I paid off by myself, making $50,000 a year. And the second half, I paid off with my husband, and getting married. That increased our household income to $80,000 a year. So I kind of like to say my husband and I paid off $52,000 in debt in 25 months, making $50,000 to $80,000 per year. That is also with having about $6,000 of emergency expenses at the time, and then also there were about $3,000 in addition to our tithe, because my husband and I are Christians. In addition to our regular tithe, there was about $3,000 worth of giving that we felt led to give to. So we did all of that in that short amount of time. Again, with myself while I was single before we got married, and then with him whenever we, decided to tie the knot, right? So we only within the last year, we have started using credit cards. When I was on my debt-free journey, I did not have a single credit card. I used debit cards only. I either had actual cash or I used a debit card. I really do feel like this was an important thing for me to learn about cash-based spending, only spending money that you have, to learn about budgeting and being organized with my finances. And my husband, actually, when we got married, he had a 0 credit score. He also only ever used debit cards. He never used credit cards or anything like that. So what we're going to talk about today are just some things that I've discovered as someone who did not use a credit card for about 4 to 5 years. And then now, having gotten into the credit card space, now that we've kind of decided to take our financial journey in that direction, and kind of tell you a little bit of no fluff, this is just how the dang thing went. And 4 truths that I have discovered in that time. So let me just tell you the first one. And you know what? Some people are going to be rubbed the wrong way by this, but you know what? I'm just going to say it. I think not everyone needs to have a credit card. And I'm going to expand that into not everyone needs to have a credit card at every point in time in their financial journey. Now, before the credit card loving people come at me with the fire lit with the light of 1,000 suns, let me keep explaining. So for those of you, if you're not super familiar with the financial world or personal finance or anything like that, I told you earlier, credit cards are like a super, super hot topic, right? You have your Dave Ramsey people who believe, you shouldn't have a credit card, building credit is stupid. Dave Ramsey has this thing that he says where, millionaires, they didn't build their fortune off of their credit card points, which is true and a very, very good point to make, right? So he says like no debt, all debt is bad, blah, blah, blah. And then there's like the total opposite end that are basically like worshiping the credit card. Everyone needs to have a credit card. Everyone needs to have a credit score. You cannot function in this world if you do not have a credit card or a credit score. So having kind of been around both worlds, and I look and I read articles about why people should have credit cards. I think it's very beneficial. If you have an opinion about something, or if you're looking for information, I always try to look at opposing opinions and, kind of see. A lot of times, my husband said that his dad always told him something, and it was, I don't even know. I think it might have been a quote from the Bible. Lord help me. It was basically, you eat the fish and you spit out the bones. And I think that that's something that a lot of us need to start doing with personal finance, because personal finance is personal. And so you really need to, I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether or not to get a credit card. I think that you need to take in all the information from me, not just from me, from other people, and apply that to how that applies to you and your situation. So anyways, I digress. Not everyone should have a credit card. So my husband and I are actually having really great success with credit cards right now. We've been able to get really good deals, great reward points. I've gotten some free items. We've gotten cash back with bonuses, all the things that people really praise credit cards for, right? That's what everybody talks about, is the points and the rewards and everything. But it's also really important to note that although that we have gotten benefits from credit cards and are having a good experience with credit cards, that we have been practicing very disciplined spending habits for, first of all, the first 3 years of our marriage, and then both of us ourselves before we even got married. And I think that is something really important to note, is that we don't need the credit cards. We already have a really good control of our spending. We know how much is coming in. We know how much is coming out. We've already gotten in this rhythm, and we've already understood of this understanding of not spending money that you don't have on stuff before we even got into the credit cards. So the issue I find a lot of people come into is if you're using credit cards and overspending with them consistently, at that point, those reward points aren't really being a blessing to you. So if your credit card usage is because you just don't have the money to buy the item, so you're going to put on the credit card anyway, that's when credit cards can become a problem, because credit cards have very, very, very high interest rates. You never, ever, ever want to mess with the interest rates of a credit card. So that's my first truth that I've learned about credit cards, is not everyone needs to have one at every point in time. And yeah, that's definitely number one. That's definitely number one. So let's move on to number two. So the number two truth that I've learned about credit cards is that with discipline, credit cards can be an excellent tool in your financial toolbox. So this actually kind of goes with number one, but I wanted to make sure that I mention number one first before even talking about the benefits of credit cards. Because I think sometimes people get so caught up in the benefits of credit cards, and that's actually a marketing tactic that credit cards use to entice you in. Like, oh, we get cash back when I spend, and I get all these points, and I get these benefits, which is great. But it just goes back to that idea of responsible usage. And if you can't use them responsibly, then that cash back or whatever it is you're getting, you can get 5% cash back on $300 that you didn't have. Okay, so now you just spent $200 and something that you don't have. So you kind of have to just keep going back to this idea of spending what you have. So it's easy to get sucked in. I have even found this happening to myself, the glamorous rewards and benefits that they use to kind of draw you in. But here's my thing with the credit card game. The thing about the credit card game is that if you don't know the rules if you don't know the rules, if you don't have a very high level of self-awareness, then it's going to be difficult for you to win the game. Like, how are you supposed to win the game when you don't know the rules? Like, if you're playing soccer, but you're playing with football rules, you're not going to win, right? Like, you're not going to be super successful at that game. That's a very light way to put it. You're not going to be super successful. But if you have the self-discipline, if you understand the rules, if you understand and you know yourself well enough to know that you won't be tempted into overspending with their glamorous and very well-researched mind games that they love to play with you, then it can be a very handy tool. Now, I say tool because, a hammer is a tool, right? You can use a hammer to build a house. You can also use a hammer to bash your own head in, right? So it's not necessarily the tool, it's about how you are using it and how you decide to use it, and if you are being intentional about using it in an appropriate way. So I will say this, having a good credit score, it does make your life easier. Like, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. Is it necessary to do well in this world? There's some people that argue yes, and I know that if you are super interested in getting rental real estate, and so getting mortgages and things like that on rentals, a credit score is definitely going to be part of that picture. But if that is not something you're interested in, if you're just kind of living you got your house and you're working your job and things like that, it makes things easier, but at least whenever I've looked at things myself, it's not this make or break type of thing. Honestly, my husband and I have only ever encountered a few times in our 5 years of debit card only usage where it became a little bit of an inconvenience to not have credit scores. So I'm going to give you guys a couple examples. So, for example, when my husband and I don't know if you haven't heard my story, my husband and I actually, before we got married, he lived in a renovated school bus. And then for our first year of marriage, this also helped us pay off debt. I moved into the school, they call it a schoolie, the renovated school bus. He called it Tiny Papa. And that's what we lived in for that first year. And then so we decided, after a year, to go ahead. We were debt free. We had gotten a lot of those financial goals that we wanted. We had built up our emergency fund. We decided we were ready to go ahead and move into an apartment. So when we went to rent an apartment, instead of just automatically being approved for the apartment, and it was a nice apartment in a nice area, we did have to go through a few extra steps. So we had to show proof of our income. We had to show our W-2s from our employers. We actually even had to show proof of our account balances. We have just one joint checking account and a few joint savings accounts, so that wasn't anything super crazy. And then we did also have to pay, I believe it was an extra $400 for our deposit. And we ended up getting that back whenever we left the apartment because we paid our rent on time and we didn't have any damage to the apartment. So we ended up getting that $400 back, but it was not an issue, not that much of an issue. We were actually also able to buy a home without a credit score. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, it was definitely a process. It was not like a quick approval type of thing. We did use the mortgage company that Dave Ramsey uses called Churchill Mortgage, because they do something that is called the manual underwriting process, where it's actually kind of similar, but obviously much more in depth of the process that I just told you about getting our apartment without a credit score or with a 0 credit score. So we had to present our tax returns for the last couple years that listed our income, so the mortgage company, so they could know that we could actually pay the bill, right? Because we didn't have a credit score to back up our ability to pay bills on time and things like that. So they need to have some other form of proof, so that when they're loaning this money to you as a bank, they want to know that you're going to pay it back, right? With interest, of course. So we also had to get a letter signed from our employers to verify that we had worked there. So like there was talking to like HR directors. It was definitely a process, and of course it would have been a bit easier if we had credit scores. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. But it definitely wasn't anything that was just so absolutely terrible that it would make me go cry in a corner. So I just want to let you know, it's not impossible to buy your primary residence without a credit score. If you're trying to get into rentals and things like that, I feel like that would be very difficult if you're not paying cash. I'm not going to speak tremendously on that because that's just that's something I really don't know very much about. It's something my husband and I may or may not decide to get into, but right now we're really just throwing lots of money into investments. Okay, so 4 truths about credit cards. Number 1, I don't think that everyone needs to have a credit card at every point in time, especially if you are still really learning. If you know that you don't have the self-discipline to have credit cards, if you have a history of getting yourself into a lot of credit card debt, you may need to just back up a little bit and get your money management game on point, and then maybe go back into the credit cards. And then also that with discipline, credit cards can be an excellent tool in your toolbox. Again, having a credit score. My husband and I were going on a trip in January. I was able to redeem my credit card points for one of our airline tickets. So we actually only ended up having to pay for one airline ticket. So that was pretty cool. All right, so the third truth that I've learned about credit cards. I want you to listen to me. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not watching this on YouTube, I'm like zooming into the camera right now. Always, 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 always pay off your credit cards in full every single month. So do you remember that credit card game that I was talking to you about? This is one of the rules of the game. And if you can't follow that rule, you're gonna lose. Okay? It just is what it is, because when you do not pay your credit cards in full, that's when you start to accumulate interest. So if you ever keep a balance on your credit card, you're going to be charged interest for that. The average credit card interest rate is anywhere from 15 to 20%. No, thank you. Absolutely not. So suddenly, that Target shopping spree that cost you $100 can easily get racked up to $300 in a few months if you're not careful and if you're not mindful of what you're spending. So I'm gonna give you like an honesty moment here. All right. I pay off our credit cards every week. Now, you do not have to do that. I'm not recommending that you do that. Whatever. You don't have to be as anal as I am about it, but I just really like the idea of just keeping a zero balance on credit cards. Getting a credit card was definitely a big step for us. It was something we felt that we were ready to do and that we had the self-discipline to be able to handle that. It has not changed our spending at all. But for me, just never having had them before, and I just don't like the idea of like carrying a balance on things. And like, that's just me. Again, personal finance, half of the term personal finance is personal. I just really like the idea of keeping things super clean so that nothing gets mixed up or untracked for a reason. That's another reason I love the Copilot budgeting app. They're not sponsoring this video or this podcast episode, but I really love the Copilot app because what it does is you can actually input our credit card and our debit card is in the app. And so every time I swipe, whether it's a debit purchase or a credit card purchase, it still will populate in our transactions, and I can still categorize it in different, in whatever budget category it goes into, whether it's entertainment, whether it is like a utility bill or things like that. That has been super, super beneficial because it still gets us in that rhythm of spending. It's almost like you're spending with cash because we're still only spending and doing transactions that are within our budget. So the Copilot app really, really helps with that. I absolutely love it. I think I do have a code for a free trial. So it's in the show notes. So go find that. And here's a truth bomb for you. I'm going to try to be gentle. Okay. If you can't afford to pay off your credit cards in full every month, you don't have a credit card problem, you have a budget problem. Okay? This is a huge red flag, and it definitely warrants you taking a really good look at your income and your expenses. And this is actually something that I'm going to talk about in the Budget Without Burden course, because this is so important. If your expenses are higher than your income, you're going backwards, sis. Like literally, you're in the negative. You're operating in the negative, okay? Now, depending on your situation, maybe you're overspending for your income, or maybe you are hustling and you're doing the best you can, but you're just really not making that much money. If you come to me and say you're making $25,000, $30,000 a year and you're having a hard time not going to debt on credit cards to buy groceries, that's because you're making $25,000 to $30,000 a year. It's not because you're being an irresponsible turd and spending too much money, right? If you come to me and you're making $200,000 a year and you're just like, oh, I can't seem to get it together, and you live in like Louisiana or something that doesn't have a ridiculous cost of living, then we may need to talk about your expenses, like just a little bit, So again, it's not good or bad. It just is. So if part of that going into credit card debt every month, part of that, oh, well, I can't pay off my card every month, that means you either have an expense problem, an income problem, or both. So that is a big red flag that you really need to take a look at your numbers. Because if you don't look at your numbers, you're not going to be able to fix the problem that you're having. And then unfortunately, all of that credit card debt, all that interest, it really can very quickly, with such a high interest rate, it can snowball out of control and make you feel so weighted down. So the best thing you can do is just not put yourself in that situation and create that as like a standard and an expectation in your life is, I'm going to pay off my credit cards every month. Or you can be super anal like me and pay them off every week. Okay, so number 4, the last one, and this may also rub some people the wrong way, but you know what? I'm just going to rub, okay? I'm just going to rub. All right, let's do it. I do not believe credit cards are for emergencies. I believe that's what emergency funds are for. Now, hear me out. There's this very popular narrative of, oh, well, I'm just going to have this car for emergencies, or I'm just going to use this car for emergencies. Now, whenever I see this like on TV or the movies, it usually ends up with somebody like going out on like the big shopping spree and buying boots or something with their parents' emergency credit card. And it's kind of funny. But let's like step away from the reality TV for a second and we'll get back to actual reality. If you have the forethought and the organization to have been planning with your finances, then one of the first things that you need to get is an emergency fund, okay? An emergency fund, let me tell you, okay, an emergency fund is like the peaceful stream amongst the crazy winds of a Category 5 hurricane, okay? An emergency fund is like the soft, sweet melody of a bird amongst the chaos of a screaming pre-K4 classroom, okay? So when fit hits the shan, which I promise you it eventually will, having a good sum of money in the bank ready to go whenever you need it, I just can't describe that feeling of peace. I really can't. I just can't describe it. And my husband and I, our emergency fund has been, we just went through Hurricane Ida. And we actually just finished going through the claim with our insurance. We're getting our roof replaced. And because of our deductible, we're going to have to come out of pocket for our fencing and for some lattice work that we have in like the carport area of our home. And having that emergency fund, knowing that like if something crazy happened, if our insurance company was going to be a butthead and wouldn't pay for a roof or something like that and it was leaking everywhere, we know that at least we could cover it up front and deal with the insurance company later. Thankfully, our insurance company has been absolutely amazing. Highly recommend. And been very, very transparent with us, and we're very fortunate, but sometimes things do not go that way. And, a lot of times, my husband and I, we very much operate on this idea of like, we're going to hope for the best. We're going to hope for the best, but we're going to prepare for the worst. That way, either way, we're going to be okay. We're not going to be destitute. We're not, things like that. Because at the end of the day, you really don't know what life is going to throw at you. You really, really don't. So, again, it's reasonable to say that when an emergency happens, so I'm going to switch a little bit. I think it's safe to say that when an emergency happens, it is very likely that there's also going to be a disruption to your income. And if you're using credit cards to cover emergencies, first of all, then by definition, that means that you don't have the money to cover that emergency. So then, first of all, you don't have an emergency fund, right? But again, I think it's a reasonable thing to think that when an emergency happens, there's probably going to be a disruption in income somewhere in that, right? Emergencies can be health related, like a family member or a spouse getting sick. One of my husband's coworkers, his 2-year-old, was in the hospital for cancer for months, and he was working and keeping the daughter with the grandma while mom was at St. Jude with the little one. So mom had to quit her job, so her income was disrupted. Plus, they're paying medical bills, and he's still working, and we're trying to work overtime to make up for that, and they've got more expenses. So stuff like that does happen. Emergencies can be job related, like a family member or a spouse just losing their job. I think if COVID's taught us anything, it's taught us that nothing is a sure thing, right? There's people who got furloughed, people who got fired, things like that. Or maybe it's a family member or a friend that passed away, and the funeral's in 4 days, and you need to get a plane ticket to be able to go to that funeral, to be able to cover that expense so that you can go be with your family or whoever it is. They live across the country or something like that. So, there's lots of ways that emergencies will show up. Or, say you need to take time off of work, and to do that, you've used up all your PTO, and then maybe you're dealing with a loss of income from that. That's another very not far-fetched reason why you may have a loss of income due to an emergency. So life is messy, life is unpredictable, and sometimes life might just crap all over you at once. Okay, it happens. It totally happens. And I'm not saying that money is going and having money in the bank is going to just fix all the problems. It's not. It's not. It just isn't. But being as financially prepared as you can be for these situations, it's going to make your life easier, and it's going to lift that certain amount of stress. And I can't say that enough. Going through that hurricane was stressful. Whether we had an emergency fund or not, it was stressful. But it was much less stressful because we had an emergency fund. So at least I knew that cash was there, so that whatever happened, I was like, all right, whatever happened, we got 20 grand. We got 20 grand in savings account, on top of other things that we have. All right, we're good. We're good to go. So that's why I don't like the idea of using credit cards for an emergency. I feel like it's a way to band-aid the fact that you're not organized with your finances, and you're not operating intentionally with your finances. Because if you were, you would have you would very, very likely have some kind of emergency fund. Okay, so I laid it out on the table. That's what I got for you, those 4 truths. So let's summarize them again really, really fast before I let you go. So the first thing, not everybody should have a credit card, all right? Some people, credit cards have been an absolute nightmare and have not been a blessing in their life. If you've been overspending with credit cards, if there's whatever it is that's going on, you might really need to just address some crap that's going on inside of yourself before you start bringing in the temptation of using a credit card back into your life. And with that note, with discipline and intention, credit cards can be an excellent tool in your financial box. There are benefits to having a credit score. There are the rewards points, so those are great. But just know that those are never going to outweigh the damage that you can do to yourself and your financial future with a credit card if you do not have the discipline and the organization to use them appropriately. Remember, the credit card game, you have to know the rules and follow the rules to be able to win, right? And then the third one is always pay off your credit cards every single month. If you can't pay them off every single month, then you need to back up and figure out why. Are you overspending? Are you disorganized with your spending? Do you have an income problem for wherever you live in the country? If you live in a very high cost of living area and you're not making much money, that is a serious thing that you need to address, because that's damaging. That's not just damaging your today, that's damaging your tomorrow, your next week, your next month, and your next year, your next decade. So that's something you really need to look at. And the last one is, I don't believe that credit cards should be your go-to for emergencies. Your emergency fund should be your go-to for emergencies, because you know what? American Express, MasterCard, Old Navy even has a credit card. Goodness. None of them care whether or not you swiped it for an emergency or not. You know, the interest rate on your credit card doesn't change whether or not you used it for an emergency or not. That's still going to be, a 15 to 20% amount of interest on whatever purchases you made, whether it was to buy diapers for your baby who needed diapers, or to go on a shopping spree at Target that you shouldn't have gone on, right? So you really just need to, everything always just goes back to being intentional, having a plan. And how if you are intentional and have a plan, a lot of these other financial symptoms that people will see, like credit card debt, things like that, a lot of times those things will take care of themselves once you're organized and once you have a plan. So all in all, I am a previous non-credit card user. Now I do use credit cards. I have found that there have been benefits to them. The rewards points, like I said, I got a free flight, but it's also important to note that our spending has not changed since getting credit cards. It's also important to note that understanding the rules of the quote credit card game, they're offering those benefits and things like that. Just understand that they're not offering all of those things out of the kindness of their heart. They're offering those things to you to get you and kind of suck you in, which, it's not about being good or bad or whatever. You need to understand that that's part of a lot of psychology of that's what's going on a lot of times with credit card companies. When you swipe the credit card and you're like, oh, I'm getting, not only am I not spending real cash, so there's research that says that we spend more when we're not spending cash and when we're spending with plastic. Which there's actually some interesting theories now about Gen Z who've never really spent with cash, or that it's the opposite, but I'll get into that with another episode. But for now, most of us, when we spend with cash, we spend less than when we swipe the card, because we may or may not feel that there's a transaction or a loss of goods taking place. But also it even goes farther than that whenever you feel like by you spending money, you're getting money, right? It's a very, very interesting little marketing tactic that they use, because you think, oh, I swiped the card, oh, I'm getting 5% back, so it's fine. It's well, yes, you are, but you're still spending that money. So it's definitely a very fascinating topic, very, very interesting topic. If anyone wants to delve deeper into that on a later episode, please let me know. I'd love to do an episode on that. But I think a big portion of this is just, you really need to just be aware, and that level of awareness about what's going on around you, and then what's going on inside of yourself, and then come to a conclusion about what is going to be best for you. Are these risks worth these benefits? For Sally Sue, that may be so. For Dilly Doo or whoever, I don't know, I decided to make that rhyme. It may not be. So at the end of the day, you need to decide what is going to be right for you. So with that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you so much for coming on, listening to just little old me, because I just kind of felt like talking about this topic, because I get asked about credit cards all the time. So I hope you found this information helpful and valuable, and know that all the information that I'm providing is just based off of my own experience, my own research. But at the end of the day, I ain't your mama, so you need to do your own research topics you're interested in, research yourself and understand yourself, and make the best decision for you. All right. I'll check you later. Happy wealth building. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to hear more no fluff, getting the dang thing done stuff for myself and other real life SLPs, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or pledge a small amount on patreon.com/speechgoods. If you found this content valuable, please share it with others so we can get this message out there. And if you haven't already, join us on Instagram. Handle is @speechgoods. See you there.